At 11:43 on a February morning in 1967, Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Hathcock pressed his eye against an 8-power unertl scope mounted on top of a weapon that was never designed for what he was about to attempt. 23 years old, born in Little Rock, Arkansas, Marine Corps sniper with 42 confirmed kills. The target was a Viet Cong courier resting on a rock formation 2,500 yards away, 1.4 miles, 25 football fields laid end to end. The weapon in Hathcock's hands was an M2 Browning .50 caliber machine gun. Marines called it Deuce. Designed in 1918 to punch through armor plating and aircraft fuselages. Weight, 84 pounds. Rate of fire, up to 600 rounds per minute. Barrel length, 45 inches. No one had ever used it as a precision instrument. Hathcock's commanding officer stood 3 feet behind him with binoculars, watching the same rock, the same courier, the same impossible distance. The wind across the Duc Pho hillside was running at approximately 8 miles per hour from the southeast. Temperature, 92 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity, 73%. The ballistic mathematics were absurd. A .50 BMG round fired at 2,500 yards would be in flight for 3.2 seconds. It would drop approximately 247 feet from the bore line. Wind drift could push it 6 feet left or right. The bullet would be supersonic for the first 1,000 yards, then tumble into transonic instability, then settle into subsonic flight, each phase altering its trajectory in ways that couldn't be calculated with paper and pencil. The margin of error under optimal conditions was 6 feet in any direction. The human head is approximately 9 inches wide. What Hathcock's battalion commander didn't know was that the Viet Cong were watching too. 5 separate enemy observation posts had been tracking Marine sniper activity from Hill 55 for 6 weeks. They'd documented the effective range of the Winchester Model 70 rifles. They'd calculated the maximum danger zone. They'd adapted. The enemy had gotten smart. They stayed beyond 1,500 yards. They moved supplies at distances the Marines couldn't reach. Until Hathcock stopped playing by the rules they expected. Before we start, tell us, from where are you watching this video right now? Drop a comment below. I'd love to know. If you've got family or friends who served in Vietnam, share this video with them to honor their stories. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and join our community as we uncover history's untold bravery together. Carlos Norman Hathcock II grew up in Geyer Springs, Arkansas, teaching himself to shoot with his grandmother's rifle. By age 12, he was hunting squirrels to put food on the family table. By 17, he'd won the Wimbledon Cup at Camp Perry, Ohio, the most prestigious long-range shooting competition in the United States. 1,000 yards. Iron sights. Bullseyes smaller than a dinner plate. He enlisted in the Marine Corps in May 1959. Deployed to Vietnam in September 1966 as part of 1st Marine Division. Assigned to Sniper Platoon operating out of Hill 55 Firebase near Da Nang. Within 4 months, he'd killed more enemy combatants than any Marine sniper in the war. His primary weapon was a Winchester Model 70.306 rifle topped with an 8-power unertl scope. The same scope he'd used to win Camp Perry. Maximum effective range against human targets, 1,000 yards under ideal conditions. Beyond that, bullet drop and wind drift made precision impossible. The Viet Cong learned this the hard way. After losing 11 confirmed snipers to Hathcock in the first 3 weeks of January 1967, enemy intelligence officers began distributing new tactical protocols. The directive was simple: maintain minimum distance of 1,800 yards from Hill 55. Conduct supply runs at dawn and dusk when light degraded sniper visibility. Use terrain masking. Move fast. Never stop in the open. It worked. By mid-February, Hathcock's kill rate had dropped 40%. Enemy supply lines were functioning. North Vietnamese Army regulars were resupplying Viet Cong units operating in Quang Ngai province without interference. Hathcock watched through his unertl scope as enemy couriers moved supplies along trails just beyond his reach. He could see them clearly, could identify weapons, could count the rice bags strapped to bicycles, could do absolutely nothing about it. For 3 days, he watched the same courier use the same trail at the same time. The man would stop at the same prominent rock formation, a granite outcropping that jutted from the hillside like a broken tooth. He'd rest, smoke a cigarette, then continue south toward the supply depot. The rock was 2,500 yards from Hathcock's position, nearly a mile and a half, twice the effective range of any sniper rifle in the Marine Corps arsenal. On the fourth day, Hathcock walked to the motor pool. The Marine mechanics at Hill 55 had seen plenty of strange requests. Jury-rigged radio antennas, improvised armor plating welded onto jeeps, field modifications that would make engineers at Quantico have nightmares. But when Gunnery Sergeant Hathcock asked them to mount his 8-power Unertl telescopic sight onto an M2 Browning .50 caliber machine gun, they thought he'd lost his mind. The M2 Browning was a crew-served weapon. It required 3 men to operate effectively: gunner, assistant gunner, and ammunition bearer. It was designed to suppress enemy positions with sustained automatic fire, to destroy light vehicles, to engage aircraft, to punch through concrete walls. It was not designed for precision. The recoil from a single .50 BMG round generated approximately 83 foot-pounds of energy, enough to knock the weapon off target by several feet if not properly mounted. The barrel heated rapidly during sustained fire, causing thermal expansion that altered the bore diameter and shifted point of impact. The mechanical tolerances inside the action were measured in thousandths of an inch, tight enough for reliability, too loose for match-grade accuracy. Every engineer who'd ever studied the M2 knew it was mechanically incapable of precision beyond 800 yards. Hathcock didn't care what the engineers thought. He'd spent 2 weeks studying the ballistics. A .50 BMG round weighed 750 grains, nearly 5 times heavier than the .306 rounds his Winchester fired. Muzzle velocity was 2,810 feet per second. The bullet was boat-tailed and aerodynamically stable. At extreme range, the heavier projectile would resist wind drift better than lighter rifle rounds. The math said it was possible. Barely. The mechanics spent 6 hours fabricating a custom mounting bracket. They used steel plate scavenged from a destroyed APC, welded it to the top cover of the M2, machined a dovetail slot that matched the Unertl scope base. When they finished, Hathcock test-fired 3 rounds into a dirt berm. The scope stayed mounted. The weapon cycled. The project was technically feasible. Whether it was tactically useful remained to be seen. If you're finding this story as compelling as we did researching it, hit that like button. Every like tells the algorithm to show this forgotten piece of history to more people. And subscribe if you haven't already. We're bringing you stories like this that deserve to be remembered. Back to Hathcock. Zeroing a weapon means aligning the point of aim with the point of impact. For a standard rifle at 100 yards, it takes maybe 20 rounds in 15 minutes. Adjust the scope. Fire. Measure the group. Adjust again. At 2,500 yards, the process was exponentially more complex. Hathcock needed a target at exactly that distance. Something visible through an 8-power scope. Something that wouldn't move. Something he could use as a daily reference to verify his zero remained consistent. The granite rock formation where the Viet Cong courier stopped every day was perfect. For 3 consecutive mornings, Hathcock climbed to his position on the Duc Pho hillside before dawn. He'd set up the M2 Browning on its tripod, mount the Unertl scope, range the rock with binoculars to confirm the distance. Then he'd begin the process. The first challenge was calculating holdover. At 2,500 yards, a .50 BMG round would drop 247 feet below the bore line. Hathcock needed to aim that far above his target to compensate. Through an 8-power scope, 247 feet of elevation at that distance translated to holding the crosshairs approximately 70 feet above the rock. He was aiming at empty sky and trusting mathematics to bring the bullet back down. The second challenge was reading wind. An 8-mile-per-hour crosswind would push the bullet 6 feet horizontally. But wind wasn't consistent across 2,500 yards of open terrain. It varied with elevation, changed direction around hillsides, accelerated through valleys. Hathcock watched grass movement at 300 yards, watched trees at 800 yards, watched dust patterns at 1,500 yards. He was reading wind he couldn't feel, calculating drift he couldn't measure, compensating for forces that changed every 30 seconds. The third challenge was trigger control. The M2 Browning trigger required approximately 14 pounds of pressure to break. Standard sniper rifles used triggers set at 2 to 3 pounds. The heavier trigger made it nearly impossible to press straight back without disturbing the sight picture. Hathcock had to squeeze gradually, maintaining perfect alignment, applying pressure until the weapon fired without him knowing exactly when. On the first morning, he fired 11 rounds. None hit the rock. He couldn't even see where they impacted. At that distance, the bullets were striking somewhere in a 100-yard radius around his aiming point. On the second morning, he adjusted his hold based on estimated wind and elevation corrections. Fired 9 rounds. On the 7th shot, he saw dust kick up 15 feet left of the rock. He was getting closer. On the third morning, his 4th round struck the base of the granite formation. The 5th round hit 2 feet from the top. The 6th round impacted dead center. He had a 0. The Viet Cong supply network in Quang Ngai province operated with remarkable efficiency. Couriers moved ammunition, medical supplies, and rice along established trails that connected North Vietnamese Army staging areas to Viet Cong units operating near marine positions. The system relied on speed, dispersion, and staying beyond effective engagement range. The courier Hathcock had been watching for 6 days was part of this network. Intelligence estimates suggested he was moving between 12 and 15 kilograms of supplies per trip. Likely ammunition, possibly medical supplies. Definitely high-value cargo that justified the daily exposure on an established trail. The man's routine never varied. Depart the northern staging area at approximately 1000 hours. Travel south along the Ridgeline Trail. Stop at the prominent rock formation at approximately 1140 hours. Rest for 10 to 15 minutes. Continue south. The rock was his mistake. On February 18, 1967, the courier arrived at 11:43 exactly as predicted. He was carrying 2 canvas bags slung across his shoulders. He wore standard black pajamas. No visible weapon. He climbed onto the top of the granite formation and sat down. From his vantage point, he could see for miles. Watch for marine patrols. Monitor the valley below. What he couldn't see was Hathcock, 2,500 yards northwest, settling behind the M2 Browning. Hathcock's commanding officer, Captain Edward Land, stood beside him with binoculars. Land had authorized the experimental M2 sniper system. He'd observed the 3-day zeroing process. He'd watched Hathcock hit the rock repeatedly at a distance that should have been impossible, but he'd never watched Hathcock shoot at a human being with it. The wind was running southeast at approximately 7 miles per hour. Temperature was 91 degrees. Humidity was 68%. Conditions were nearly identical to the zeroing sessions. Hathcock placed the crosshairs of his unertl scope on a point 70 feet above the courier's head. He was aiming at nothing, at empty air, trusting that gravity and ballistics would pull the bullet down onto target. He controlled his breathing, exhaled halfway, held. The M2 Browning weighed 84 pounds. The tripod added another 44 pounds. 128 pounds of steel, mechanics, and optical glass, all focused on delivering a single 750-grain projectile across 1.4 miles of Vietnamese jungle. Hathcock began pressing the trigger. 14 pounds of pressure. Gradual. Smooth. The crosshairs stayed locked on his aiming point. The weapon fired. The recoil drove the M2 back against its tripod mounting. The muzzle blast kicked up dust in a 20-foot radius around the position. The sound echoed across the valley, a deep, percussive boom that was unmistakably a .50 caliber weapon. 3.2 seconds later, the courier's head snapped back. He fell off the rock. Didn't move again. Captain Land kept his binoculars locked on the target. He saw the impact, saw the body fall, saw the definitive proof that what every ballistics engineer said was impossible had just happened. He lowered the binoculars and looked at Hathcock. Confirmed kill. 2,500 yards. It was the longest confirmed sniper kill in Marine Corps history. But Hathcock wasn't finished. For days after the rock formation kill, Hathcock was back in position with the M2 Browning. The Viet Cong hadn't changed their supply routes yet. They didn't know what had killed their courier. The sound of the shot had echoed across the valley, making it impossible to determine the exact firing position. They knew Marines were operating in the area, but 2,500 yards was beyond any known threat range. They kept using the same trails. At 13:15 hours on February 22nd, Hathcock spotted movement on the Ridgeline Trail. Through his 8-power unertl scope, he identified a Viet Cong courier riding a bicycle. The bike was heavily loaded. Canvas bags hung from the handlebars. A wooden crate was strapped to a rear rack. Something long and rectangular was tied along the frame. Hathcock adjusted his position slightly, ranged the target, approximately 2,600 yards, 100 yards farther than his established zero. The courier was moving. Speed was approximately 8 miles per hour. The bicycle was following the trail in a relatively straight line, but small variations in steering made the target's lateral position unpredictable. Hathcock had two options: wait for the courier to stop, or attempt a shot on a moving target at a range where even stationary targets were nearly impossible to hit. The cargo on that bicycle was worth the risk. Intelligence reports indicated Viet Cong units were running critically low on ammunition. The rectangular bundle tied to the frame was likely rifles. Kalashnikovs, probably 6 to 8 weapons, enough to fully equip a squad. Hathcock made his decision. He led the target, placed his crosshairs approximately 80 feet above and 12 feet ahead of the moving bicycle. He was aiming at a point in empty space where he calculated the courier would be in 3.2 seconds, accounting for the courier's forward motion, the bullet's flight time, and the ballistic drop. He pressed the trigger. The .50 BMG round left the muzzle at 2,810 feet per second. It climbed initially, following the slight upward angle of the bore. At 600 yards, it reached its apex and began dropping. At 1,000 yards, it transitioned from supersonic to transonic flight. The bullet wobbled slightly as it passed through the sound barrier. At 1,800 yards, it stabilized into subsonic flight. 3.2 seconds after Hathcock fired, the bullet struck the front fork of the bicycle. The impact sheared the fork clean off. The front wheel collapsed. The courier went over the handlebars and hit the ground hard. The cargo scattered across the trail. Canvas bags split open. The wooden crate broke apart. 6 Kalashnikov rifles spilled onto the dirt. The courier got to his hands and knees. He was stunned but alive. He looked around, trying to understand what had just happened. A bicycle doesn't just disintegrate. Something had hit it. He saw the rifles on the ground. His mission was to deliver those weapons. He started gathering them up. Grabbed 2. Looked around again. Still no sign of danger. No sound of aircraft. No visible Marines. He reached for a 3rd rifle. Hathcock fired again. This time he aimed for center mass. The courier was stationary. The wind hadn't changed. Hathcock held 70 feet high, made a minor windage correction, and pressed the trigger. The 2nd round struck the courier in the upper torso. He dropped instantly. Captain Land confirmed both shots through binoculars. 2 confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 2,500 yards. 1 on a moving target. Both with a weapon that wasn't designed for precision. The implications were starting to register with Marine Corps intelligence officers. If Hathcock could consistently engage targets at these distances, the Viet Cong's adapted tactics, staying beyond conventional sniper range, were suddenly obsolete. The range war had just shifted back in favor of the Marines. Within 72 hours of the bicycle kill, North Vietnamese intelligence officers distributed new tactical protocols to Viet Cong units operating in Quang Ngai province. The updated directives reflected a fundamental change in threat assessment. Maximum safe distance from Hill 55 was increased from 1,800 yards to 3,500 yards. Supply runs were limited to nighttime hours only. Couriers were instructed to fragment cargo into smaller loads carried by multiple individuals using different routes. Rest stops were prohibited. Movement was to be continuous until the courier reached cover. The operational efficiency of the supply network dropped by an estimated 30 to 40%. More couriers were needed to move the same amount of supplies. Transit times increased. The risk of interception by conventional Marine patrols went up because routes were more dispersed and less defendable. Hathcock's 2 confirmed kills at extreme range had forced the enemy to completely restructure their logistics operations. But the Marine Corps wasn't celebrating yet. There were questions. Serious questions about whether what Hathcock had done was repeatable or just extraordinarily lucky. The ballistics were borderline impossible. A 6-foot margin of error against a 9-inch target meant that even under optimal conditions, the probability of a first-round hit was statistically negligible. The fact that Hathcock had made multiple hits suggested either that he'd found some technique that overcame the mechanical limitations of the weapon, or that he'd been operating in a brief window of near-perfect atmospheric conditions that wouldn't exist again. Independent testing after the war attempted to replicate Hathcock's shots. Using modern ballistic computers, precision ammunition, and controlled range conditions. Shooters with decades of experience struggled to achieve consistent hits on human-sized targets at 2,500 yards with M2 Browning machine guns. Hit probability hovered around 12 to 18%, even with unlimited ammunition and no time pressure. What Hathcock did, first-round hits on real targets under combat conditions, remained unexplained. Some attributed it to extraordinary skill. Hathcock's track record supported this. Wimbledon Cup winner. 42 confirmed kills before the M2 experiment. Documented ability to read wind and calculate holdover that exceeded other snipers in his unit. Some attributed it to exceptional ammunition. The .50 BMG rounds Hathcock used were match-grade, hand-selected for consistency. Variations in powder charge, bullet weight, or case capacity that might be acceptable in machine gun ammunition would be catastrophic for precision shooting. Hathcock may have had access to ammunition lots that were unusually uniform. Some attributed it to favorable conditions. Temperature, humidity, air pressure, and wind all affect ballistic performance. It's possible that the specific atmospheric conditions on those February days created a ballistic environment that was optimal for extreme-range shooting. A slightly denser air mass could have reduced bullet drop. A consistent wind could have been easier to read and compensate for. Most likely, it was all three factors aligning simultaneously: exceptional skill, exceptional ammunition, and exceptional conditions. A convergence that wouldn't happen often, but happened enough times for Hathcock to prove the concept was viable. The record stood for 35 years. Not until 2002 did a Canadian sniper exceed Hathcock's distance with a confirmed kill at 2,530 meters using a .50 caliber rifle specifically designed for precision. Modern equipment, modern optics, modern range-finding technology. Hathcock did it in 1967 with a scope designed for a hunting rifle, mounted on a machine gun designed for anti-aircraft work, using hand-calculated holdover and wind calls based on watching grass move. At 6:32 on a March morning in 1967, Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Hathcock watched through his 8-power unertl scope as 150 North Vietnamese Army soldiers walked into a killing field they didn't know existed. 23 years old. 6 confirmed kills in the past 11 days. Operating with one spotter. Lance Corporal John Roland Burke, 19 years old from Sacramento, California. 2 Marines. 150 enemy soldiers. 6 days of rations. No backup. No extraction plan. The NVA company was moving in standard formation across rice paddies in Elephant Valley, north of Hill 55. They were disciplined, well-armed, confident. They had no reason to suspect that the mist rising from the paddies concealed 2 men who were about to destroy them. Hathcock's Winchester Model 70.306 rifle was zeroed for 600 yards. The lead NVA soldier was approximately 580 yards away. The entire company was strung out behind him in a column that stretched nearly 400 yards. Burke lay beside Hathcock with binoculars, calling wind. 3 miles per hour, left to right. Temp 71. Humidity 82%. The company commander was clearly visible, walking third in formation, carrying what appeared to be a map case, making himself an obvious target for anyone watching. What the NVA didn't know was that Hathcock and Burke had been watching this valley for 4 days. They'd observed enemy movement patterns, documented patrol routes, identified terrain that funneled enemy units into predictable paths. They'd selected firing positions, planned fallback routes, calculated engagement ranges for every section of open ground. They'd turned Elephant Valley into a trap, and the NVA company had just walked into it. Hathcock placed his crosshairs on the lead soldier's center mass, controlled his breathing, exhaled halfway, held. The Winchester fired. The lead soldier dropped. Before the company could react, Hathcock worked the bolt, acquired the second soldier in line, fired again. 2 soldiers down in 4 seconds. 148 enemy soldiers suddenly realized they were being engaged by precision fire from an unknown position. What happened next would become one of the most devastating small unit engagements of the Vietnam War. And officially, it never happened at all. 6 days earlier, Hathcock and Burke had departed Hill 55 Firebase on what Marine intelligence classified as an independent stalking mission. The operational parameters were deliberately vague. No specific targets. No geographic restrictions. No requirement to maintain contact with infantry patrols. Translation: find targets of opportunity and engage at your discretion. Elephant Valley was 12 kilometers north of Hill 55. Intelligence reports indicated regular NVA movement through the area. Supply routes, patrol routes, staging areas for units preparing to engage Marine positions. The valley was a logistics corridor, critical terrain that the North Vietnamese needed to control. Marine infantry had conducted sweeps through Elephant Valley 3 times in the previous 2 months. Each time, they'd found evidence of recent enemy activity but made minimal contact. The NVA were avoiding direct engagement with large Marine units. They'd move through the valley, conduct their operations, then withdraw before Marines could fix them in place for decisive engagement. Hathcock's mission was to change that calculation. Make the valley dangerous. Make the NVA pay for using terrain they thought they controlled. He and Burke carried 6 days of rations. 1,200 rounds of .306 ammunition for the Winchester. 30 rounds for Burke's M14. For M67 fragmentation grenades. 2 smoke grenades for marking positions if emergency extraction became necessary. 1 PRC-25 radio for communication with Hill 55. They also carried something most Marine units didn't have: the authorization to call for artillery support directly. Hathcock had worked with artillery forward observers enough times that the battery commanders at Hill 55 trusted his target coordinates. If Hathcock called for fire, they'd send it. That capability would prove decisive. The first 3 days were reconnaissance. Hathcock and Burke moved through the valley in a deliberate grid pattern. Observing, documenting. They found evidence of regular enemy activity. Boot prints in mud that was less than 12 hours old. Cigarette butts that were still fresh. Rice scattered near a trail junction where someone had opened a bag carelessly. The NVA were using Elephant Valley frequently. They just weren't using it carefully. On the 4th day, Hathcock identified the ambush site. A section of rice paddies bordered by irrigation levees and small dikes. The paddies were currently dry, late in the season after harvest, before the monsoon rains would flood them again. The ground was flat, open, with minimal cover. Any unit moving through this area would be exposed for 500 to 700 yards. Hathcock and Burke established their primary firing position on a low rise at the northeast edge of the paddies. They had clear lines of sight across the entire kill zone. Elevation advantage of approximately 40 feet. Concealment provided by tall grass and scrub vegetation. Multiple fallback positions within 100 yards if they needed to relocate under fire. They settled in and waited. On the morning of March 16, 1967, the NVA company appeared exactly where Hathcock predicted they would. The mist was lifting from the valley when Burke spotted movement at the south end of the rice paddies. He tapped Hathcock's shoulder twice. Hathcock brought his rifle up and looked through the unertl scope. NVA soldiers, moving in column formation. Single file initially, then spreading into a loose tactical formation as they entered the open ground. They were moving north to south, perpendicular to Hathcock's position. Burke counted them through binoculars. "I've got 30 visible. More coming. Company strength, probably." Hathcock ranged the lead soldier. 580 yards. Wind was minimal. Temperature was climbing, but still relatively cool. Perfect conditions. He fired twice in rapid succession. 2 soldiers down before the sound of the shots even registered with the rest of the company. The NVA reaction was textbook. The entire company immediately hit the ground. Officers shouted commands. Soldiers low-crawled toward the nearest cover, a small dike approximately 3 feet high that ran east to west across the paddies. But they had 600 yards of open ground to cover, and Hathcock was already acquiring his 3rd target. He fired. A soldier 50 yards from the dike fell. Fired again. Another soldier dropped. Worked the bolt smoothly, controlled, no wasted motion. 5th shot. 6th shot. 7th shot. By the time the NVA company reached the protection of the dike, 8 soldiers were dead or dying in the open paddies. 142 soldiers were now pinned behind a 3-foot-high dirt mound, unable to advance or retreat, taking fire from a position they couldn't locate. Standard NVA tactics called for immediate counterattack. Suppress the enemy position with overwhelming fire. Assault with superior numbers. Close the distance until hand grenades and bayonets eliminated the threat. Four NVA soldiers attempted exactly that. They rose from behind the dike and charged directly toward where they thought the shots were coming from. They were moving fast, zigzagging, staying low. They covered maybe 200 yards before Hathcock killed the first one. 300 yards before the second one fell. The third and fourth made it to 400 yards before Burke engaged them with his M14. None of them made it within 450 yards of Hathcock's position. The NVA company stopped trying frontal assaults. What they didn't know was that Hathcock and Burke were already moving. Standard sniper doctrine. Fire, relocate, fire again from a different position. Never stay in one place long enough for the enemy to fix your location and bring effective counterfire. By the time the assault team was dead, Hathcock and Burke had moved 80 yards west to their secondary position. Same elevation, same line of sight to the dike, but from a completely different angle. The NVA company was searching for threats from the northeast. The next shots came from due north. A pinned enemy unit has three options: attack, defend, withdraw. The NVA company tried attacking. Four soldiers were dead. Attacking again would produce the same result. Defending was marginally better. Stay behind the dike. Wait for the sniper to make a mistake. Hope that reinforcements arrive or that darkness provides an opportunity to escape. Withdrawing required movement. Movement meant exposure. Exposure meant more casualties. The company commander chose defense. Keep everyone behind the dike. Minimize exposure. Wait for darkness. Then conduct an organized withdrawal under cover of night. It was a reasonable tactical decision. It would have worked against most threats. It didn't work against Hathcock, because Hathcock didn't need the NVA soldiers to move. He just needed them to stay exactly where they were while he systematically destroyed their ability to function as a cohesive unit. The dike provided cover from direct fire, but it didn't provide concealment from observation. Hathcock could see soldiers moving behind the dike, could see helmet tops when someone raised their head to look, could see hands when someone reached up to adjust equipment, could see weapons when someone tried to establish a firing position. Every time something became visible, Hathcock engaged it. A soldier raised his head to observe. Hathcock fired. The soldier dropped. A soldier tried to move to a better position. Hathcock fired. The soldier fell. A soldier reached up to signal to another squad. Hathcock fired. The hand disappeared in a spray of blood. Burke was feeding him targets through the binoculars. Movement, center section, 15 degrees right of that dead tree. Hathcock would acquire, fire, confirm hit. Target down. What else you got? The engagement became methodical, clinical. Hathcock wasn't hunting anymore. He was performing surgery, identifying critical targets. Officers, radio operators, anyone attempting to organize a response, anyone trying to establish command and control. Every shot removed another piece of the company's combat effectiveness. By noon, the NVA company had lost 15 soldiers killed and an estimated 20 wounded. 23% casualties. That's the threshold where most units begin losing combat effectiveness. Morale breaks. Soldiers stop following orders. Unit cohesion disintegrates. The NVA company was approaching that threshold, and they still had no idea where the fire was coming from. If this story is gripping you the way it gripped us when we found it in the archives, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that real history matters. And subscribe. We're bringing you forgotten stories of skill and courage every day. Back to Elephant Valley. Darkness should have been the NVA company's salvation. No visibility meant no precision fire. They could withdraw under cover of darkness, reorganize, and escape the kill zone. Hathcock had anticipated this. At 1745 hours, as the sun was setting behind the western hills, Burke keyed the radio handset and spoke to the artillery battery at Hill 55. Fire mission. Illumination. Grid coordinates 874321. Continuous coverage requested. Duration, all night. The artillery battery commander confirmed the request. Confirm continuous illumination, all night duration. Confirmed. We've got approximately 130 enemy soldiers pinned in the open. We need light to keep them there. Roger. First round's outbound in 3 minutes. At 1748, the first illumination round burst over Elephant Valley. The parachute flare drifted slowly downward, casting harsh white light across the rice paddies. Shadows were sharp and black. Everything else was exposed. The NVA company commander must have realized in that moment that his tactical situation had just become catastrophic. Darkness wasn't coming. The snipers weren't leaving. His soldiers were trapped in a kill zone with no way out. He had one option left: survive until dawn, then attempt a coordinated withdrawal before heat exhaustion and dehydration rendered his unit combat ineffective. Hathcock had no intention of letting them survive until dawn. Throughout the night, illumination rounds burst overhead every 8 to 12 minutes. Each flare provided approximately 4 minutes of usable light before it burned out and drifted to the ground. During those 4 minutes, Hathcock would scan the dike through his scope, looking for movement. The NVA soldiers needed water. They needed to treat wounded. They needed to redistribute ammunition. They needed to communicate. All of those activities required movement. Every time someone moved, Hathcock fired. At 19:20 hours, a soldier tried to low crawl to a wounded comrade 20 feet away. Hathcock killed him before he covered 10 feet. At 21:30 hours, 3 soldiers tried to make a break for a tree line 400 yards south. Hathcock killed the first one. Burke wounded the second with his M14. The third made it to cover, but the attempt cost the company any illusion that escape was possible. At 2300 hours, an NVA officer stood up behind the dike and shouted orders to his soldiers. Hathcock shot him through the chest. The officer fell backward, and no one else attempted to organize the defense. By midnight, the NVA company had stopped trying to fight back. They were simply trying to survive. Soldiers pressed themselves into the dirt behind the dike. No one moved unless absolutely necessary. No one spoke. No one returned fire. Hathcock and Burke took turns sleeping in 3-hour shifts. One man always awake, always watching, always ready to fire. The illumination rounds kept coming. The light never stopped. Dawn arrived at 06:15. The NVA company had been pinned in place for nearly 24 hours. Casualties now exceeded 35 killed and an estimated 40 wounded. 50% casualties. The unit was combat ineffective. The soldiers who were still alive were exhausted, dehydrated, and psychologically broken. The company commander made his final decision: survive at any cost. Get to cover. Reorganize. Withdraw. At the far southern end of the rice paddies, approximately 700 yards from the dike, stood a small cluster of structures. Abandoned farming buildings. Concrete walls. Tin roofs. Defensible positions that could provide cover from sniper fire. If the company could reach those buildings, they might survive. The commander organized what remained of his unit. 2 platoons, approximately 50 to 60 soldiers, would conduct a coordinated assault toward the buildings. They'd move fast, covering the 700 yards in less than 3 minutes. Speed would compensate for exposure. The remaining soldiers would provide suppressing fire, attempting to keep the snipers' heads down long enough for the assault elements to reach safety. At 06:32, the assault began. 60 NVA soldiers rose from behind the dike and sprinted south across the open rice paddies. They were running in dispersed formation, maintaining intervals, moving with the desperate speed of men who knew they were already dead if they didn't reach cover. Hathcock fired. A soldier fell, worked the bolt, fired again. Another soldier dropped. He was shooting as fast as he could cycle the bolt action, but 60 targets moving at speed across 700 yards of open ground was more than one sniper could engage effectively. Soldiers were making it through, closing the distance to the buildings. 500 yards, 400 yards, 300 yards. Burke was on the radio. Fire mission. High explosive. Grid coordinates 874368. Danger close. Friendlies at grid 874321, 700 yards north of target. Request immediate fire for effect. The artillery battery at Hill 55 didn't hesitate. They'd been supporting this mission for over 24 hours. They trusted Burke's coordinates. Shot out. The first 105mm high explosive round left the gun tube at Hill 55 traveling at 494 meters per second. Flight time to target, approximately 19 seconds. The NVA soldiers reached the buildings. They crowded inside, pressing into the concrete structures, seeking cover from the sniper fire that had killed so many of their comrades. The first artillery round impacted the center building at 06:33 in 12 seconds. The explosion was catastrophic. 105mm He rounds carry 6.6 pounds of composition B explosive. The blast wave collapsed the tin roof. Shrapnel shredded everything within a 50-foot radius. The concrete walls channeled the blast inward, amplifying the overpressure. The second round hit 3 seconds later. Then the third. Then the fourth. The artillery battery fired for effect. Multiple rounds. Rapid fire. Saturation coverage. The buildings disappeared in a series of overlapping explosions. Smoke and dust rose 300 feet into the morning air. When the barrage stopped, nothing was moving near the structures. Burke lowered the radio handset. Hathcock lowered his rifle. The rice paddies were silent. Behind the dike, approximately 70 NVA soldiers remained alive. They'd watched 2 platoons, half their company, get obliterated by artillery fire. They'd watched 2 days of systematic destruction. They'd lost more than 80 soldiers to 2 Marines. They stopped fighting, scattered, broke contact. Individual soldiers began withdrawing in different directions, abandoning equipment, abandoning wounded, abandoning any pretense of unit cohesion. The NVA company ceased to exist as a functional military unit. 2 days later, Marine infantry companies conducted sweeps through Elephant Valley. They found bodies scattered across the rice paddies. They found destroyed equipment near the buildings. They found blood trails leading into the jungle. They found evidence of a devastating engagement. What they couldn't find was an accurate body count. Artillery fire had scattered remains across hundreds of yards. Bodies were dismembered. Some were buried under collapsed structures. Some had been dragged away by survivors attempting to recover the dead. The scene was, as one Marine lieutenant described it, scrambled beyond accurate counting. Marine Corps sniper doctrine required 3 witnesses for confirmed kills: the sniper, the spotter, and a commissioned officer. Hathcock and Burke were the only witnesses to most of the engagement. No officers had been present during the 6-day operation. The official record listed 0 confirmed kills for the mission. 0. Despite the fact that intelligence estimates suggested 80 to 100 NVA casualties. Despite the fact that an entire enemy company had been combat ineffective. Despite the fact that Hathcock and Burke had fundamentally altered North Vietnamese tactical doctrine for operations in Elephant Valley. None of it counted officially. Hathcock never complained about it. He understood the system. Confirmation requirements existed for good reasons: preventing exaggeration, ensuring accuracy, maintaining the integrity of the historical record. But the NVA knew what happened. Intelligence reports captured after the war documented the Elephant Valley engagement in North Vietnamese military analysis. They described it as a catastrophic failure of reconnaissance and tactical judgment. They identified the engagement as a turning point in how NVA units approached terrain that appeared undefended. The report specifically noted 2 enemy snipers immobilized and destroyed company strength unit over extended duration. Demonstrated requirement for improved counter-sniper doctrine and area reconnaissance before movement through exposed terrain. The enemy confirmed what the Marine Corps couldn't. Elephant Valley changed how Marine snipers operated in Vietnam. Before Hathcock's mission, snipers were primarily attached to infantry units, providing precision fire support during patrols and defensive operations. They were force multipliers, valuable, but subordinate to the infantry's mission. After Elephant Valley, senior Marine officers began authorizing independent sniper operations. Small teams, 2 or 3 men, conducting extended stalking missions with minimal support. They were given broad operational latitude. Find targets. Engage at your discretion. Disrupt enemy operations. Create chaos. The results were dramatic. Enemy supply routes became dangerous. Staging areas became contested. NVA units began dedicating significant resources to counter-sniper operations, diverting combat power away from offensive operations. 2-man sniper teams were tying down company and battalion-strength enemy units. The force multiplication factor was extraordinary, but the cost was high. Independent operations meant extended exposure. No immediate backup. No quick reaction force if things went wrong. Snipers operating beyond friendly lines were on their own. If they got compromised, if they got surrounded, if they got wounded, extraction wasn't guaranteed. Hathcock knew this better than anyone. He'd spent 6 days in Elephant Valley with 1 other Marine, facing an enemy company that outnumbered them 75 to 1. If the NVA had organized effective counter-sniper operations, if they'd brought mortars to suppress his positions, if they'd coordinated flanking maneuvers, Hathcock and Burke would have been overrun. The fact that it worked once didn't mean it would work consistently. The fact that he survived didn't mean the next sniper team would. But the tactical value was undeniable, and the Marine Corps kept sending sniper teams into the field on independent operations. Some came back with confirmed kills and medals. Some came back with nothing officially recorded, but enemy operations disrupted. Some didn't come back at all. Carlos Hathcock rarely spoke about Elephant Valley publicly. When asked about his most significant engagements, he'd mention other missions. The sniper duel with the female NVA sniper known as Apache. The crawl through 1,500 yards of open field to kill an NVA general. The 2,500-yard shot with the M2 Browning. But Elephant Valley stayed with him. Not because of the casualties. Not because of the tactical success. But because of the men he killed. In most sniper engagements, the target disappears in the scope. You see the reticle. You press the trigger. The target drops. It's clinical. Distant. The scope creates psychological separation between the shooter and the killed. In Elephant Valley, Hathcock watched those soldiers for 2 days. Watched them react to being pinned. Watched them try to save their wounded. Watched them attempt to organize defenses. Watched them lose hope. Watched them make the desperate decision to run for the buildings. He knew they were going to die before they did. He called in the artillery that killed them. He watched it happen. Years later, talking to other veterans, he described it as the moment he fully understood what war actually cost. Not in strategic terms, not in tactical terms, but in human terms. Those were soldiers doing their jobs, following orders, trying to survive. They weren't the enemy in an abstract sense. They were men his age, far from home, stuck in a war none of them had chosen, trying to make it through one more day. And he killed them, not because he wanted to, but because that was his job, because the mission required it, because war doesn't stop for moral ambiguity. He carried that weight for the rest of his life. The understanding that competence and duty sometimes require you to do things that are necessary and terrible and permanent. The NVA company that walked into Elephant Valley in March 1967 ceased to exist. Some of those soldiers were buried in Vietnam. Some were never recovered. Some made it home decades later as remains identified through forensic analysis. All of them left families who never got full answers about what happened. Hathcock understood that too. He knew that somewhere in North Vietnam, mothers and fathers and wives and children waited for soldiers who would never come home. He knew that his confirmed kills, 93 officially, hundreds more unofficially, represented hundreds of families destroyed. He never celebrated it, never glorified it, never pretended it was anything other than what it was. The brutal mathematics of survival in a war where someone had to lose for someone else to win. John Roland Burke returned to the United States in 1968. He left the Marine Corps in 1970. He rarely spoke about his time in Vietnam, never attended reunions, never sought recognition. He worked as a mechanic in Sacramento for 37 years. He died in 2011 at age 63. His obituary mentioned his military service in one sentence: served honorably in the United States Marine Corps during the Vietnam War. Carlos Hathcock continued sniper operations in Vietnam until 1969, when he was severely burned pulling Marines from a burning vehicle. He spent the next decade training Marine snipers at Quantico. He died in 1999 at age 56 from complications related to multiple sclerosis. The Elephant Valley engagement remains unconfirmed in official records. 0 credited kills. No medals awarded specifically for that mission. No formal documentation beyond intelligence reports and after-action summaries that mention sniper activity resulting in enemy casualties. Number unknown. But the mission changed Marine Corps sniper doctrine, established templates for independent operations, proved that small, highly skilled teams could achieve strategic effects against numerically superior forces. And somewhere in the archives of the Vietnam People's Army, there's a report about a company that entered Elephant Valley in March 1967 and didn't come out. A report that warns future commanders about the dangers of exposed terrain and the devastating effectiveness of American sniper teams operating beyond conventional ranges. The official record says it didn't happen. The enemy's record says it did. And 2 Marines who were there know exactly what happened, even if one of them isn't here to talk about it anymore. At 7:43 on the morning of March 19th, 1967, Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Hathcock crouched behind a sandbag position at Hill 55 Firebase. watching smoke rise from a crater 240 yards southwest of the perimeter. 26 years old, holder of the Wimbledon Cup for long-range precision marksmanship, he'd already accumulated 47 confirmed kills in Vietnam. The Marine beside him, 20-year-old Lance Corporal Jim Land, pressed binoculars against his eyes and shook his head. Another crater. Another failure. Somewhere in the tree line beyond that smoking hole, a Viet Cong sniper was laughing. For 6 days, this enemy marksman had owned Hill 55. One shot every morning. One casualty every afternoon. Professional fire. Deliberate fire. Fire from a man who understood exactly what he was doing. The Marines had responded with everything doctrine allowed. Artillery batteries had hammered the suspected position with 105mm howitzer rounds. Phantom jets had screamed overhead, dropping 500-pound bombs. Cobra gunships had raked the tree line with 20mm cannon fire. And every single time, after the smoke cleared and the ground stopped shaking, the sniper came back. Same position, same pattern, same professional calm. What the Marine commanders at Hill 55 didn't know was that Carlos Hathcock was about to solve their problem with a weapon that had never been used as a sniper rifle. A weapon designed to destroy tanks. A weapon that weighed more than 9 men could comfortably carry. A weapon that, according to every manual in the Marine Corps, had absolutely nothing to do with precision marksmanship. Hathcock was going to kill this sniper with a recoilless rifle. Carlos Norman Hathcock II grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas, learning to shoot with his grandmother's Springfield rifle in the woods behind their house. By age 12, he could hit running rabbits at 100 yards. By 17, he'd won every shooting competition the state had to offer. In 1959, at 20 years old, he enlisted in the Marine Corps and within 4 years became one of the finest competitive marksmen the service had ever produced. The Wimbledon Cup, awarded annually at Camp Perry for the best long-range shooter in America, sat on his shelf. 1,000 yards. Iron sights. Perfect wind reading. Perfect trigger control. Perfect breathing. He'd beaten every competitive shooter in the country. Vietnam was different. In competitions, targets didn't shoot back. In competitions, you knew the exact distance. In competitions, the humidity didn't turn your uniform into a second skin and the jungle didn't hide men who wanted you dead. The heat alone was enough to break most men. Temperatures pushing past 100 degrees by midday. Humidity so thick you could wring water from the air. Equipment that rusted overnight. Rifle barrels that needed constant cleaning or they'd jam at the worst possible moment. Hathcock deployed to Vietnam in September 1966 with the 1st Marine Division. His reputation preceded him. The brass wanted their champion shooter doing what champion shooters do. So they assigned him to develop counter-sniper doctrine and train other Marine marksmen. But Hathcock didn't just want to teach. He wanted to hunt. He understood something most people never grasp about sniping. It wasn't about killing. It was about solving tactical problems with precision. Every enemy you eliminated was one less threat to the Marines you served with. Every position you neutralized was one less danger point on the map. The work was surgical, calculated, and absolutely necessary. By March 1967, he'd established himself as the most effective sniper in the theater. 47 confirmed kills. Each one documented. Each one verified by a spotter. Each one a tactical problem solved with a single well-placed shot. He carried a Winchester Model 70 bolt-action rifle with an 8-power unertl scope, the same setup he'd used to win Wimbledon. The Marines issued him 14 rifles to everyone else. Hathcock trusted his Winchester. 9 pounds of wood and steel that he knew better than his own heartbeat. He'd hand-loaded his own ammunition back in the States, testing different powder charges and bullet weights until he found the combination that gave him the tightest groups at 1,000 yards. That rifle was an extension of his will. Hill 55 sat 8 miles southwest of Da Nang, a firebase carved into red earth and surrounded by sandbags, wire, and claymore mines. 300 Marines called it home. It wasn't much, just a collection of bunkers and fighting positions, but it controlled a key supply route and served as a base for patrols into Viet Cong territory, which meant the Viet Cong wanted the Marines there to feel uncomfortable. Enter the sniper. The enemy marksman had appeared on March 13th. First shot came at 9:15 in the morning, hitting a Marine carrying supplies from a helicopter. Clean shot through the shoulder. Medevac required. The wounded Marine was 19 years old, from Detroit, 3 months into his tour. He'd survive, but he'd never lift his arm above his head again. The Marines couldn't pinpoint the exact location, but they knew the general direction. Southwest tree line. Maybe 300 yards. Maybe less. Standard response kicked in. Artillery forward observer called in fire mission. 6 rounds of high explosive from the 105mm howitzers at Danang. The shells screamed overhead and detonated in the tree line, throwing earth and shattered timber 200 feet into the air. Each shell contained 11 pounds of composition B explosive. The blast radius was 50 yards. Anything within that radius should have been obliterated. When the smoke cleared, the Marines waited. Surely nobody could survive that. 9:45 the next morning. Another shot. Another Marine down. Leg wound this time. The sniper was back. And now the Marines knew they were dealing with someone exceptional. If you're watching this and realizing that conventional firepower doesn't always solve unconventional problems, hit that like button. We're about to show you how one Marine rewrote the rules of counter-sniper warfare. Back to Hill 55. The Marine Corps had clear doctrine for dealing with enemy snipers. Suppress with artillery. If that fails, call in airstrikes. If that fails, send out a patrol to flush them out. Hill 55 followed doctrine perfectly. After the second shooting, they escalated. F-4 Phantom jets rolled in, dropping 500-pound bombs on the suspected sniper position. The concussion rattled windows into Nong 8 miles away. The tree line disappeared in fire and smoke. Blast waves stripped leaves from trees 300 yards beyond the impact point. Surely nobody could survive that. 9:30 the next morning. Another shot. Another casualty. This time a corpsman running to help another wounded Marine. The shot hit him in the back, punching through body armor that was supposed to stop rifle rounds. The bullet entered just below his left shoulder blade and exited through his chest. He died before they could get him to the aid station. 22 years old. From Sacramento. He'd volunteered for corpsman duty because he wanted to save lives, not take them. The sniper wasn't just good. He was proving a point. You can't kill what you can't see. By March 18th, 6 days into the harassment, 14 Marines had been wounded and 2 had died. The sniper fired once, sometimes twice per day, always from roughly the same position, always during morning hours when the sun was behind him and in the Marine's eyes. He'd wait until someone moved in the open, calculate his shot, fire, and disappear. Then the Marines would hammer his position with artillery or airstrikes. Then he'd come back. The psychological impact was devastating. Marines started moving differently. Faster. More fearful. They'd sprint between positions instead of walking. They'd wait until absolutely necessary before crossing open ground. The firebase had become a prison where the bars were invisible but absolutely real. The Viet Cong sniper understood something crucial about human psychology. If you can make an enemy burn resources without costing yourself anything, you win. Every artillery barrage cost the Americans money, shells, and coordination. Every airstrike pulled jets away from other missions. Every casualty required medevac helicopters, medical supplies, and paperwork. And all the sniper needed was patience, one rifle, and enough discipline to return to a position everyone assumed had been destroyed. He was fighting a war of attrition with ammunition measured in single bullets, while forcing the Americans to expend thousands of pounds of high explosive. The mathematics favored him completely. Carlos Hathcock watched this pattern develop with growing frustration. He'd gone out on counter-sniper patrols 3 times, trying to locate the enemy marksman, but the terrain favored defense. Dense jungle, multiple firing positions, endless places to hide. The vegetation was so thick you could be 10 feet from someone and never see them. The ground was soft enough that footprints disappeared within hours. The Viet Cong knew this land. They'd fought French colonials here. They'd fought Japanese occupiers before that. They understood every trail, every hiding spot, every advantage the terrain offered. The VC sniper would take his shot from one location, and by the time Hathcock's patrol reached the area, he'd vanished. Professional work. This wasn't some farmer with a rifle. This was a trained marksman who understood fieldcraft as well as Hathcock did. On the evening of March 18th, Hathcock sat in the firebase command bunker with Captain Edward Land, the officer who'd helped establish the Marine sniper program in Vietnam. They studied maps and reconnaissance photos, trying to triangulate the sniper's position from the angles of fire. The math kept pointing to the same area. A slight rise in the tree line, maybe 250 yards from Hill 55's southwest perimeter. Good concealment. Clear fields of fire. Perfect sniper position. The rise gave maybe 3 feet of elevation advantage, but that was enough. From that height, the sniper could see over the first line of sandbags and catch Marines moving in what they thought was cover. Land tapped the map with a pencil worn down to a nub. We've hit that grid square with everything we have. Either he's the luckiest man in Vietnam, or he's got a bunker we can't see from the air. Hathcock studied the map in silence. He'd been thinking about this problem for days, running through scenarios, considering options. Then he said something that made Land look up. What if we stop trying to kill him with indirect fire? We've sent patrols. He's gone before we get there. Not patrols. Direct fire. Precision. Carlos, he's 250 yards away behind God, knows how much earth and timber. Your rifle can't punch through a fortified position. Hathcock smiled. Mine can't. But we've got something that can. Land stared at him. You're not serious. I've been calculating the ballistics all afternoon. It'll work. You want to use an M40 recoilless rifle as a sniper weapon. Why not? It's accurate enough if you know what you're doing. It's designed to kill tanks, Carlos. And that sniper's in a bunker that's acting like a tank. We matched the tool to the problem. What Hathcock was proposing violated every principle of conventional weapons employment. The M40 recoilless rifle was an anti-tank weapon. 105 millimeters of high-explosive firepower designed to destroy armored vehicles. It weighed 114 pounds fully assembled. It required a crew of 3 to operate. It had an effective range of 8,000 yards against stationary targets. And absolutely nobody in the history of warfare had ever used one as a sniper rifle. The weapon was too big, too loud, too unwieldy. Snipers worked in silence and stealth. The M40 announced its presence to everyone within 5 miles. But here's what Hathcock understood that the manuals didn't explain. The M40 was capable of remarkable precision if the crew knew what they were doing. The sight system could be calibrated. The ballistics were predictable, and the high-explosive anti-tank round it fired could penetrate any fortification short of reinforced concrete. If the enemy sniper was hiding in a bunker that could withstand artillery near misses, that bunker couldn't withstand a direct hit from a heat round traveling at 500 feet per second. Artillery killed through fragmentation and blast. You had to land close. The M40 killed through direct impact and shaped charge penetration. You just had to hit what you aimed at. And hitting targets at 250 yards was something Hathcock could do in his sleep. This is the moment where conventional thinking fails and innovation wins. If you want to see how Hathcock turned an anti-tank weapon into a precision instrument, stay with us. What happens next changed counter-sniper doctrine forever. The M40 recoilless rifle worked on a simple principle. When fired, the weapon vented propellant gases backward through venturi at the breech, counteracting the recoil from launching the shell forward. This meant the weapon could fire massive rounds without destroying itself or breaking the shoulder of whoever pulled the trigger. Infantry could carry it. Crews could deploy it quickly, but that backblast was dangerous. Everything within 30 feet behind the weapon when it fired would be hit by superheated gas and debris traveling at hundreds of feet per second. The crew had to position carefully or risk killing their own people. On the morning of March 19th, Hathcock and 3 other Marines manhandled the M40 into position on Hill 55's western perimeter. They'd chosen a spot that offered clear line of sight to the suspected sniper position while allowing enough space behind them for the backblast. The weapon sat on a tripod mount, barrel pointed toward the tree line. The tube was 7 feet long and looked absurdly oversized compared to Hathcock's Winchester. This wasn't a precision instrument. This was a blunt object. But Hathcock had spent 2 hours the previous night calculating the firing solution. 247 yards to target. Slight elevation change of approximately 3 feet. Morning crosswind from the east at approximately 8 miles per hour. Temperature 86 degrees. Humidity suffocating at 92%. The math was different from rifle work, but the principles were the same. Gravity, wind, distance. Account for each variable, and the projectile goes where you want. Hathcock had competed at 1,000 yards with iron sights, reading wind flags and mirage, making adjustments measured in quarter minutes of angle. 247 yards with a calibrated sight system was well within his capability. The only question was whether the enemy sniper would present a target. Or more accurately, whether he'd fire another shot and reveal his position one more time. They didn't have to wait long. At 9:12, a Marine Lance Corporal sprinted from one bunker to another carrying ammunition. The distinctive crack of a rifle shot echoed from the tree line. The round missed by inches, kicking up red dirt 2 feet from the Marine's boots. The Lance Corporal dove into cover, unhurt but shaken. His helmet had fallen off during the dive, and he lay there, breathing hard, not willing to move to retrieve it. Somewhere in those trees, the enemy sniper was working his bolt, chambering another round, scanning for his next target. Maybe satisfied with the near miss. Maybe frustrated he hadn't connected. Either way, he was still there, still hunting. Hathcock had marked the position during previous engagements. He'd watched the muzzle flash. He'd timed the shots. He'd studied the angles. He knew where the man was hiding. Now he just needed to put a 105mm high-explosive round into a target roughly 6 feet wide at 247 yards. With a weapon designed to hit tanks, not individuals, the margin for error was slim. Miss by 3 feet, and the round would detonate harmlessly in the jungle. The shaped charge needed direct impact to be effective. He made final adjustments to the sight. Checked wind again. The leaves on the trees were moving slightly, east to west. Maybe 10 miles per hour now. He recalculated. The projectile would drift slightly in that wind. Not much at this range, but enough to matter. He adjusted right, compensating. The other Marines on the crew watched in silence. One of them, a corporal from Iowa, had asked earlier if this was really going to work. Hathcock had just smiled. This was either going to work or they were about to waste an expensive anti-tank round on dirt and trees. But Hathcock didn't think in terms of failure. He thought in terms of probability and precision. Hathcock settled behind the sight. His breathing slowed. Competition breathing. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. Let the heart rate drop. Find the calm space between heartbeats where the body stops moving and the world narrows to just crosshairs and target. The crosshairs settled on the target area. Slight rise in the terrain. Dark shadow that might be a fighting position or might be nothing more than vegetation and shadow. But Hathcock had watched that spot for 6 days. He knew. The place where every previous shot had originated. The place where a man was hiding behind earth and timber, confident in his defenses. His hand moved to the trigger. The weapon was loaded with an M67 heat round. High explosive anti-tank. 8 pounds of shaped charge designed to punch through tank armor by focusing explosive force into a jet of superheated metal traveling at over 20,000 feet per second. The charge would penetrate, then detonate inside the target. Against a bunker, it would be catastrophic. Against a human being inside that bunker, there would be nothing left to identify. No body to recover. No evidence except absence. Hathcock fired. The recoilless rifle produced a sound unlike anything most people have ever heard. Not quite an explosion. Not quite a roar. A deep, concussive boom that seemed to compress the air itself and then release it in a shockwave you felt in your chest. The barrel erupted in flame 6 feet long. The backblast vented behind the weapon in a cone of superheated gas that scorched the sandbags 30 feet away and kicked up a dust cloud that obscured everything. The tripod rocked, but held. The crew had braced it well. And downrange, at 247 yards, the high explosive round covered the distance in less than a second. The impact was spectacular. The round struck exactly where Hathcock had aimed, detonating on contact with a flash of white light so bright it left afterimages. The shaped charge penetrated whatever fortification the sniper had built, burning through earth and timber like they were paper, and detonated inside with a thunderclap that echoed off the hills and came back as a fading rumble. Earth and timber exploded upward in a geyser of debris that rose 50 feet into the air before falling back in a rain of dirt and shattered wood. Secondary explosions followed as ammunition cooked off. Small pops and cracks as rifle rounds detonated in the heat. Fire and smoke boiled into the morning sky, black and oily. When it cleared, there was no fighting position anymore. Just a crater. Just absence where something had been. The Marines on Hill 55 waited. 9:15 came and went. No shot. 9:30. No shot. 10:00. Nothing. The sniper harassment that had defined their lives for 6 days stopped. Completely. Permanently. Whatever had been in that position was gone. The silence felt strange. Marines kept glancing at the tree line, expecting another shot, but it never came. Patrols went out that afternoon to assess. They found the crater Hathcock had created, 12 feet wide, 6 feet deep. The shaped charge had bored a hole through 3 feet of earth and timber before detonating inside the bunker. Shattered timber and torn earth. Fragments of equipment. No body. The explosion had been too complete. The heat too intense. But they found enough evidence to confirm someone had been there. Spent brass casings. 7.62 millimeter. Soviet manufacture. Blood on the shattered remains of what might have been a rifle stock. Pieces of a Soviet-made Mosin-Nagant rifle scattered across 30 feet. The bolt mechanism was intact, blown 20 yards from the crater. A scope, cracked and useless, half buried in dirt. The Viet Cong sniper had built a fortified bunker that could withstand artillery near misses, positioned himself for long-term operations, and maintained fire discipline that would have impressed any military instructor. And Carlos Hathcock had killed him with a weapon nobody thought could be used that way. Here's what makes this story matter beyond one dead enemy sniper. Hathcock understood that the mission wasn't about following doctrine. It was about solving problems. Standard counter-sniper tactics had failed. Artillery had failed because it couldn't achieve the precision needed. Airstrikes had failed for the same reason. Patrols had failed because the sniper had better fieldcraft and terrain knowledge. So Hathcock stopped trying to do what the manual said and started thinking about what would actually work. A fortified position can't move. A sniper who returns to the same location repeatedly is predictable. Predictability creates vulnerability. And if you have a weapon that can deliver precision firepower through fortifications, you have a solution. The doctrine said use rifles for sniping and recoilless rifles for tanks. Hathcock saw tools, not categories. The Marine Corps didn't officially adopt recoilless rifles for counter-sniper work. This remained a one-time adaptation, a field-expedient solution to a specific tactical problem. But word spread. Other snipers heard the story. Other units facing similar problems started thinking creatively about available resources. When conventional tools fail, unconventional thinking wins. Sometimes the answer isn't in the manual. Sometimes the answer is sitting in your armory being used for something completely different, and all it takes is someone willing to see past the label. What the official records don't capture is what this meant for the Marines at Hill 55. For 6 days, they'd lived under constant threat. Every movement in the open was a calculated risk. Every supply run could end with a medevac. The enemy sniper had imposed psychological pressure that artillery couldn't relieve. He'd made them afraid in their own firebase. Men who'd volunteered to fight were hiding behind sandbags, afraid to cross 30 feet of open ground. Hathcock ended that fear with one shot. 14 wounded Marines. 2 dead. And then silence. The patrols could move. The supply runs could happen. The firebase could function. Men could walk without sprinting. That's what victory looked like at Hill 55. Not medals or commendations. Just the absence of fear. Carlos Hathcock would go on to become the most famous American sniper of the Vietnam War. 93 confirmed kills by the time he rotated home in 1969. Each one verified. Each one documented. He developed techniques that became standard doctrine. The ghost suit camouflage he created. The crawling techniques that let him move 300 yards in 4 days without being detected. The counter-sniper tactics that saved countless Marine lives. He trained generations of Marine snipers who took his methods and refined them further. He survived being burned over most of his body when his vehicle hit a mine, and he still pulled 7 Marines from the burning wreckage before collapsing. He received the Silver Star for that action. But the recoilless rifle shot at Hill 55 never appeared in official commendations. It was filed away as a successful engagement, nothing more. No medal, no formal recognition. Just another day in the jungle where a Marine solved a problem and saved lives. The enemy sniper remains unidentified. Vietnamese records from that period are incomplete, and the Viet Cong didn't maintain the same documentation standards as American forces. He was skilled. He was patient. He understood his craft. He'd maintained discipline under pressure. He'd survived multiple artillery barges and airstrikes. He'd inflicted casualties on a fortified position from an exposed location. Under different circumstances, in a different war, he and Hathcock might have respected each other's professionalism. But this was Vietnam, where respect didn't stop bullets and professional skill just meant you survived longer than the amateurs. Both men understood the game. Only one walked away. After Hathcock rotated home, he spent years training new snipers at Quantico. He never fully recovered from the burns he sustained saving those Marines. His body carried the damage for the rest of his life. Walking became difficult. The scarring was extensive. The pain was constant. He died in 1999 at 56 years old. Complications from multiple sclerosis, possibly connected to his injuries. The Marine Corps Sniper School at Quantico bears his name now. Every Marine sniper who earns the designation learns his techniques, studies his missions, and tries to understand what made him exceptional. But most of them don't know about the day he used an anti-tank weapon as a precision rifle. That story isn't in the official curriculum. At 4:37 on the morning of September 21, 1966, Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Hathcock and Lance Corporal John Roland Burke slipped away from a Marine infantry patrol 3 miles west of Hill 55 Firebase and disappeared into jungle so thick you couldn't see 10 feet ahead. 23 years old, weighing 148 pounds, Hathcock carried his Winchester Model 70, 40 rounds of ammunition, 3 canteens, and enough rations for 6 days. Burke, 20 years old from Tennessee, carried the spotting scope, radio, and his own supplies. The infantry patrol continued east without them. For the next 6 days, these 2 Marines would be alone in territory the Viet Cong considered theirs. What made this mission different from every conventional patrol the Marine Corps ran wasn't the duration. It was the concept. Infantry patrols followed predictable patterns. Leave at dawn. Move through designated waypoints. Return by dusk. The enemy knew this. They'd watch from concealment, avoid contact, wait for the Marines to leave, then resume operations. Hathcock had figured out that if you wanted to kill the enemy, you had to stop thinking like infantry and start thinking like prey that hunts. You had to become unpredictable. You had to stay where the enemy thought you'd left. You had to wait while they emerged from hiding and resumed the routines that kept them alive. Then you killed them. This wasn't Hathcock's first extended stalk. He'd been running these missions since arriving in country, refining the methodology with each operation. Break away from friendly forces. Establish independent operations in a designated area. Hunt for days without support. Extract at a predetermined time and location. Each mission lasted 3 to 6 days. Each mission added names to the confirmed kill list that would eventually reach 86 before his first tour ended. 1 kill every 3 days for 9 months straight. A tempo so intense his commanding officer had to physically order him to rest because Hathcock wouldn't stop volunteering for missions. Carlos Hathcock had arrived in Vietnam in September 1966 as a military policeman. For months of gate duty and traffic control while the war happened somewhere else. For months of watching other Marines head out on operations while he checked identification cards. Then the Marine Corps established a formal sniper program, and someone remembered that Hathcock held the Wimbledon Cup. They pulled him from military police duty and gave him what he'd wanted since enlisting: a rifle, a mission, and permission to hunt. He'd grown up in Little Rock, Arkansas, learning fieldcraft in woods behind his grandmother's house. By 12, he could move through forest without disturbing birds. By 15, he understood that hunting wasn't about shooting. It was about patience, about understanding your prey better than it understood itself, about being where the animal would be before the animal knew it would be there. Vietnam wasn't different. The prey just shot back. Burke had joined him 2 months after Hathcock started sniper operations. Most spotters lasted a few missions before requesting transfer. The extended stalks broke them. Days without sleep, constant danger, no backup, just 2 men alone in hostile territory with every Viet Cong unit in the area hunting for them. Burke stayed. He understood what Hathcock was building, a new way of fighting that had nothing to do with conventional infantry doctrine. The terrain west of Hill 55 was triple canopy jungle. Primary canopy at 150 feet. Secondary canopy at 80 feet. Understory so dense you moved by feel more than sight. The ground was soft, dark soil that held moisture and bred insects. Mosquitoes that could drain a pint of blood if you let them. Leeches that dropped from leaves and burrowed into any exposed skin. Snakes that could kill you in minutes. And somewhere in this jungle, Viet Cong units moved supplies, positioned troops, and planned operations against Hill 55. Hathcock and Burke moved through darkness for 2 hours before establishing their first hide position, a slight rise overlooking a trail the Marines had identified through aerial reconnaissance. The trail showed signs of recent use. Footprints, broken vegetation. The intelligence briefing suggested this was a supply route, possibly used for moving ammunition from cache points to forward operating positions. Hathcock didn't care about the supplies. He cared about who was moving them. Officers walked differently than enlisted men. They carried themselves with authority. They wore slightly better equipment. And when you killed an officer, you disrupted command and control in ways that killing 10 enlisted men never would. They spent the first day motionless. Hathcock behind the Winchester. Burke with the spotting scope, watching for movement, reading the jungle for signs of enemy presence. The heat climbed past 100 degrees by noon. Humidity pressed down like a physical weight. Sweat soaked through their uniforms within an hour, but they couldn't move to wipe it away. Movement meant detection. Detection meant death. So they lay still and let the jungle accept their presence. If you're watching this and starting to understand that real sniper work has nothing to do with Hollywood action sequences, hit that like button. What we're about to show you is patience measured in days, discomfort measured in ways most people can't imagine, and precision that required becoming something other than human. Back to the jungle. At 3:27 that afternoon, movement on the trail. 6 Viet, Song moving north. They carried supplies. Rice bags. Ammunition boxes. No weapons visible, which meant the weapons were cached nearby, or these men were logistical personnel, not combat troops. Hathcock watched through his scope. Burke watched through the spotting scope, reading body language, looking for anyone who stood out. The men moved casually. They talked. They weren't expecting contact. The jungle belonged to them, and they knew it. Hathcock didn't fire. These weren't the targets he wanted. He was hunting officers, communication specialists, anyone whose death would hurt the enemy's operational capability. Supply porters were replaceable. He let them pass, memorizing their route, their timing, their procedures. Information for future missions. The sun set at 1800 hours. Darkness came fast in the jungle. No twilight. Just day, and then night, so complete you couldn't see your hand 6 inches from your face. Hathcock and Burke didn't move. They'd selected this position knowing they'd spend the night here. No fire. No light. Cold rations eaten slowly, quietly, in total darkness. Water rationed carefully because they'd packed for 6 days and couldn't afford to run out on day 2. The jungle at night was different. Sounds carried strangely. Something moving 50 yards away could sound like it was next to you. Something next to you could be silent. Hathcock had learned to distinguish sounds. Monkeys moving through canopy. Wild pigs rooting in undergrowth. Humans walking. Humans trying not to walk. Each sound had a pattern, a rhythm. You learned to read those patterns, or you died. At 2200 hours, voices on the trail. Hathcock and Burke froze. The voices were close. Maybe 30 yards. Speaking Vietnamese in low tones. Hathcock's Vietnamese was limited to a few tactical phrases, but he could read tone. These men weren't worried. They were relaxed. Probably local Viet Song moving between positions. The voices faded north. Hathcock and Burke remained motionless for another hour, making sure nobody was following, making sure this wasn't a patrol sweeping for American positions. Day 2 began at dawn. The jungle woke slowly. Birds first, then monkeys, then the heat. Hathcock and Burke shifted positions slightly, working out cramps that had developed during the night, but they stayed in the hide. Movement during daylight was suicide. The Viet Song knew this jungle. They could spot disturbance that would be invisible to most people. Broken spider webs, crushed leaves, disturbed soil. The jungle spoke to those who understood its language. At 10:15, movement again. This time different. For men moving south on the trail. 3 carried AK-47 rifles. The 4th carried nothing visible, but walked in the center of the formation. The way the others positioned themselves around him told Hathcock everything. Officer, probably lieutenant or captain level, moving between positions, maybe conducting inspection, maybe coordinating operations. It didn't matter. He was command and control. He was the target. Hathcock settled behind the Winchester. The range was 230 yards. Slight downhill angle. No wind in the understory. Temperature 102 degrees. Humidity suffocating. The crosshairs found the officer's chest, leading the movement. Accounting for the angle, Burke whispered range confirmation. 230 yards. Hathcock's breathing slowed. The jungle sounds faded. The world narrowed to crosshairs and target. The officer was talking to one of the men beside him, gesturing, probably giving instructions. He had no idea 2 Marines were watching him. No idea his life was measured in seconds. Hathcock fired. The Winchester cracked. The sound echoed through the jungle, impossibly loud after 2 days of silence. The bullet covered 230 yards in a fraction of a second. The officer dropped. The 3 soldiers with him scattered, diving into vegetation, bringing rifles up, scanning for the source of fire. But Hathcock and Burke were already moving. Not running. Controlled movement to their secondary position 40 yards east. They prepared this position the previous day, cutting sight lines, establishing cover, planning the withdrawal route. By the time the Viet Cong soldiers started returning fire at where they thought the shot had originated, Hathcock and Burke were in the secondary position, motionless, watching. The enemy soldiers fired at shadows. 30 rounds into vegetation. Then silence. Then voices, calling to each other. One of them moved to the officer's body. Checked for pulse. Called out. The tone said everything. Dead. The soldiers looked nervous now. They knew American snipers operated in this area. They knew Marines had killed officers before. They gathered the officer's body and moved south quickly, no longer casual, no longer comfortable. The jungle didn't belong to them anymore. Hathcock and Burke remained in the secondary position for 3 hours. Standard counter-sniper response was to saturate the area with fire, then send troops to sweep for the shooter. The Viet Cong didn't have enough people in this sector to conduct a proper sweep, but Hathcock wasn't taking chances. They waited. Let the enemy waste time searching empty jungle. Let them conclude the Americans had escaped. Then, when darkness fell, they moved to a 3rd position half a mile north. Day 3. Day 4. The pattern continued. Hathcock and Burke moved through their area of operations like ghosts. They'd establish a hide position. Wait hours or days. Engage targets when appropriate. Relocate. Wait again. On day 4, Hathcock killed a Viet Cong soldier carrying a radio. Communications specialist. High-value target. The shot was 320 yards through a gap in the vegetation that existed for maybe 3 seconds as the man walked past. Burke called it before Hathcock fired. He's carrying a radio. PRC 25 equivalent. Comms guy. Hathcock put the crosshairs on center mass and fired. The radio shattered. The man fell. His patrol scattered and didn't return for 2 hours. By day 5, Hathcock had lost 14 pounds. He'd started the mission at 148 pounds. Now he was 134. Water was running low. Food was nearly gone. Sleep had been measured in minutes, not hours. His hands shook slightly from exhaustion and dehydration. His uniform was filthy, caked with mud and vegetation they'd used for camouflage. Burke looked worse. Younger. Less experienced with extended operations. His eyes had the 1,000-yard stare that came from days of constant vigilance. But the mission wasn't complete. They had one more day, one more opportunity to disrupt enemy operations before extraction. Hathcock had identified another trail during their movement the previous night. This one showed heavy use. Deep footprints. Multiple sets. Wide enough for 2 men walking abreast. Major supply route or troop movement corridor. Worth watching. They established a high position at dawn on day 6. This position overlooked the trail from 60 yards. Closer than Hathcock preferred, but the terrain dictated placement. Thick vegetation provided concealment, but limited sight lines. They'd have maybe 5 seconds of visibility when someone walked through the gap. 5 seconds to identify target. Assess threat level. Make the shot, or let them pass. At 60 yards, there was no margin for error. Miss or wound the target, and the return fire would be immediate and accurate. At 11:30, the target Hathcock had been waiting for appeared. A Viet Cong officer moving with 4 soldiers. But this wasn't a lieutenant. The way the soldiers positioned themselves, the quality of his equipment, the confidence in his movement, everything said senior officer. Possibly battalion level. He carried a map case. He was pointing at terrain features, clearly conducting reconnaissance or planning operations. This was command and control at a level that would hurt when removed. Hathcock didn't hesitate. The officer entered the gap. The Winchester cracked. The bullet struck center mass. The officer collapsed. The 4 soldiers dove for cover, returning fire wildly. Rounds snapped through vegetation 2 feet above Hathcock's position. Burke was already moving, low crawl toward the exfiltration route they'd prepared. Hathcock followed, working backward, keeping the Winchester pointed at the kill zone in case anyone was stupid enough to pursue immediately. The Viet Cong didn't pursue. They'd learned. American snipers were lethal at close range. Charging their position meant dying. The enemy soldiers concentrated on recovering their officer and withdrawing. Hathcock and Burke moved north through terrain they'd memorized over 6 days, heading for the extraction point 3 miles away. They reached the landing zone at 1500 hours. A CH-46 helicopter was already inbound, rotors beating the air, descending into a small clearing barely large enough to accommodate it. Hathcock and Burke ran the final 50 yards, broke from the tree line, and dove aboard as the helicopter lifted. The crew chief pulled them inside. They collapsed on the deck, filthy, exhausted, 14 pounds lighter than when they'd started. The debriefing at Hill 55 took 2 hours. Confirmed kills, 3. 1 lieutenant, 1 communications specialist, 1 senior officer, possibly major or lieutenant colonel. Enemy supply routes documented. Movement patterns recorded. Intelligence gathered on enemy operational procedures. The mission was classified as highly successful. Hathcock and Burke were ordered to shower, eat, and rest for 48 hours before being cleared for operations. Hathcock slept for 16 hours. When he woke, he weighed 120 pounds. He'd lost 28 pounds in 6 days. The medical officer ordered him to quarters for a week. Mandatory rest. Forced feeding. He needed to regain weight and strength before another mission. Hathcock argued. There were targets out there. The war didn't stop because he was tired. The medical officer didn't budge. 1 week. No exceptions. Here's what that 6-day mission represented beyond 3 confirmed kills. Hathcock had proven that snipers could operate independently for extended periods, deep in enemy territory, without support. Traditional doctrine said snipers supported infantry operations. They were attached to units. They fired from defensive positions or during offensive operations. They didn't operate alone. Hathcock rewrote that doctrine. He demonstrated that highly trained sniper teams could function as independent maneuver elements, hunting targets of opportunity, disrupting enemy operations through precision rather than massed firepower. The Marine Corps noticed. Other sniper teams started conducting similar extended stalks. The methodology spread. Separate from infantry at predetermined point. Operate independently in assigned area. Extract at predetermined time. The kill ratios were impressive. Snipers operating independently achieved higher confirmed kill counts per day in field than snipers operating with infantry support. Because independent snipers could wait. They could watch. They could identify high-value targets and engage when conditions were perfect. Infantry-supported snipers had to move when the unit moved. Had to engage targets of opportunity. Had to follow someone else's timeline. Hathcock conducted these extended stalks throughout his first tour. 3 days. 4 days. 6 days. Each mission added to his confirmed kill total. By the time he rotated home in September 1967, 13 months after arriving, he'd accumulated 86 confirmed kills. The math is remarkable. 1 kill every 3 days. Day in and day out. For 9 months. While losing weight to the point that his commanding officer had to physically force him to rest and eat. While developing techniques that would become foundational for modern special operations sniper doctrine. The physical toll was severe. 30 pounds lost during the tour. Constant dehydration. Sleep deprivation that bordered on medical emergency. Exposure to diseases that would have killed him without regular medical intervention. The psychological toll was worse. Days alone in jungle with enemy forces actively hunting you. The hypervigilance required to survive. The knowledge that one mistake meant death. The isolation. Burke handled it better than most, but even he requested rotation after 6 months. Too much time in the jungle. Too many close calls. Too many nights lying motionless while enemy soldiers walked within arm's reach. Hathcock never requested rotation. His commanding officer had to order him out of the field periodically or he wouldn't have stopped. He was hunting. And for Hathcock, hunting was purpose. Every officer he killed disrupted enemy operations. Every communications specialist eliminated degraded enemy coordination. Every high-value target removed from the battlefield saved Marine lives. The math was simple. His discomfort, his weight loss, his exhaustion, all of it was worth it if Marines lived who would have died otherwise. The Viet Cong adapted. Intelligence reports from captured documents showed enemy units received warnings about American sniper operations in specific areas. Officers began moving with larger security details. Communication specialists started traveling in groups rather than alone. Supply movements shifted to night hours when snipers were less effective. The enemy respected the threat, which meant Hathcock's operations were working. You don't change doctrine to counter an ineffective threat. Modern sniper training emphasizes extended independent operations. Candidates spend days in field environments without support, proving they can function under the same conditions Hathcock pioneered. Mental endurance, physical resilience, tactical decision-making without immediate supervision. The ability to remain concealed for days while enemy forces actively search for you. These skills trace directly to the extended stalks Hathcock conducted west of Hill 55 in 1966 and 67. After Hathcock rotated home, he spent years training new snipers at Quantico. He taught the extended stalk methodology, how to prepare mentally for days of isolation, how to ration food and water, how to move through hostile terrain without detection, how to identify high-value targets, how to maintain weapon function in jungle humidity, how to survive when everything is trying to kill you. Thousands of Marine snipers learned from Hathcock. Many went to Vietnam and conducted their own extended stalks. Some came home, some didn't, but they all understood they were practicing doctrine Hathcock had written with confirmed kills and lost weight. Hathcock never fully recovered from Vietnam. The weight loss damaged his metabolism. The psychological toll of 9 months hunting and being hunted left marks that never healed. Later, the burns from saving Marines when his vehicle hit a mine destroyed his body further. He died at 56, his body worn out decades before it should have been. But the doctrine survived. The technique survived. The understanding that snipers could be independent maneuver elements, not just infantry support, that survived and became foundational for how modern militaries employ precision marksmen. If this story of endurance and innovation moved you, hit that like button. Every like tells the algorithm to share this with more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're bringing you military history that matters every single week. Real people who changed how wars were fought. Real techniques that save lives. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. United States? United Kingdom? Australia? Canada? Somewhere else. Our community spans the entire world. Tell us if you served. Tell us if you knew Marines who trained under Hathcock. Tell us what other forgotten operations you want to hear about. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for making sure Carlos Hathcock's extended stalks don't disappear into classified files nobody reads. Thank you for remembering that the doctrine modern snipers used was written by a man who weighed 120 pounds because he wouldn't stop hunting. These stories matter. These techniques save lives then and save lives now. And you're helping preserve that history. You're not just watching. You're keeping memory alive.